Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to the Territory of Cinema channel. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button and giving this video a like. Today we are going to be discussing the film Kung Fu Panda 4 from 2024. The Jade Palace hums with the familiar energy of Po, the Dragon Warrior, whose journey has always been one of delightful, sometimes clumsy, self-discovery. Having ascended to the role of spiritual leader, a position bestowed upon him due to his unparalleled mastery of Kung Fu, and perhaps more importantly his boundless heart, Po faces a transition that feels far more daunting than any battle with the likes of Tai Lung or Lord Shen. He is tasked by Master Shifu, whose own journey from troubled youth to wise mentor mirrors the cyclical nature of their teachings, with finding and training his successor. This search is immediately complicated by the arrival of a formidable new threat, a shape-shifting sorceress known as the Chameleon. Her power is not merely physical. She possesses the unnerving ability to mimic the kung fu styles of any master she defeats, effectively weaponizing the legacy of the past. Her ambition, we soon learn, is to steal the power of every deceased master, culminating in the desire to take the Dragon Warrior's power for herself, thereby dominating the Valley of Peace. Po's training for his successor leads him to the city, a place often viewed with mild suspicion by the venerable masters of the Jade Palace, where he encounters Jen, a sharp-witted, street-smart fox with a penchant for petty theft and an uncanny familiarity with the martial arts underground. Initially, Po suspects Jen of being allied with the Chameleon, or perhaps just a nuisance, but her knowledge of the criminal world and surprising agility prove useful. He reluctantly takes her under his wing, seeing in her a flicker of the same untamed potential he once possessed, though her motives remain stubbornly opaque. Their pursuit of the Chameleon takes them across diverse landscapes, forcing Po to rely less on brute strength and more on the nuanced skills Shifu has always tried to instill in him, listening, observing, and understanding the chi of his opponents. Jen proves to be a quick study, absorbing techniques with an almost photographic memory, though her loyalty remains a dangling question mark. The confrontation escalates when the Chameleon reveals her true goal, obtaining the staff of the original Grand Master, which is said to unlock the final secrets of spiritual power. This forces Po to confront not only his immediate enemy but also his own anxieties about relinquishing control. He finds himself wrestling with the idea that true leadership isn't about holding on to power, but about trusting the next generation to carry the flame, even if they carry it differently. In the climactic showdown, set against a backdrop that seems determined to test every lesson learned, the Chameleon unleashes an array of stolen martial arts prowess, cycling through the formidable styles of Po's past adversaries. Po, momentarily overwhelmed, remembers a fundamental truth taught by Shifu. The most powerful style is the one that is authentically yours. He stops trying to counter each borrowed move individually and instead embraces his own unorthodox, messy, and joyful style. The style of the Dragon Warrior, which incorporates everything he has learned without being bound by any single form. Jen's true colors finally emerge. Rather than betraying Po, she uses her intimate knowledge of the city's secrets and her own unique dexterity to disrupt the Chameleon's concentration at a critical moment. It is a subtle act of heroism, proving that strength comes in many forms, not just the well-defined movements of traditional kung fu. With the Chameleon temporarily subdued, Po recognizes that Jen, despite her questionable past, has the spirit of a protector, albeit one forged in the hard alleys rather than the peaceful courtyards. Po doesn't just appoint her, he invites her to understand the role. He realizes that his successor doesn't need to be a perfect mirror of himself, but someone capable of adapting and evolving the legacy. Shifu, observing from a distance, nods almost imperceptibly, a gesture that confirms Po has finally understood the essence of true spiritual succession. It requires vulnerability and the courage to let go. The valley is safe, and Po, having found a potential heir, is ready to embrace the next quieter chapter of his incredible adventure. Shifu, with his perpetually furrowed brow that belies deep affection, sees the succession as the final, most profound test of Poe's mastery. Teaching is harder than doing. Poe, meanwhile, struggles with the weight of the title, feeling much more comfortable in his well-worn warrior tunic than in the solemn robes of a spiritual guide. The sheer thought of not fighting fills him with a strange, doughy anxiety. We see flashes of her cold calculation, a stark contrast to Poe's open, exuberant approach to combat. The very idea of this villain stealing what Poe fought so hard to earn, the essence of his identity, sends a chill down his spine that even his thick fur can't ward off. Poe's training for his successor leads him to the city, a sprawling, bustling metropolis, often viewed with mild suspicion by the venerable masters of the Jade Palace. Too much noise, too many distractions from focused meditation. Here he encounters Jen, a sharp-witted, street-smart fox with eyes that miss nothing and a penchant for petty theft, skills honed by necessity in the urban sprawl. Jen carries herself with a defensive elegance, her movements economical and precise, a stark contrast to Poe's bombastic style. Initially, Poe suspects Jen of being allied with the chameleon, or perhaps just a nuisance, seeing the familiar glint of self-preservation in her gaze, but her intimate knowledge of the criminal underbelly and surprising agility prove immediately useful. He reluctantly takes her under his wing, seeing in her a flicker of the same untamed potential he once possessed, the raw, untapped energy that fueled his own improbable rise, though her motives remain stubbornly opaque, hidden behind a practiced veneer of casual indifference. Their pursuit of the chameleon takes them across diverse landscapes, forcing Poe to rely less on the brute force that characterized his earlier triumphs and more on the nuanced skills Shifu has always tried to instill in him, listening, observing, and understanding the chi of his opponents not just as energy to be struck, but as a current to be navigated. Jen proves to be a remarkably quick study, absorbing techniques with an almost photographic memory, especially those involving stealth and misdirection. She learns quickly, yet there's a guardedness in her successes. Her loyalty remains a dangling question mark that makes Poe's internal monologue run at full speed. He sees echoes of his own past mistakes in her quick justifications for bending the rules. The confrontation escalates when the chameleon reveals her true goal, obtaining the staff of the original Grand Master, which is said to unlock the final secrets of spiritual power, the true nexus of all chi. He finds himself wrestling with the idea that true leadership isn't about holding on to power, the security blanket he's known for years, but about trusting the next generation to carry the flame, even if they carry it in a way that seems messy or unorthodox to his traditional sensibilities. The inner battle is almost as taxing as the external one. In the climactic showdown set against a backdrop that seems determined to test every lesson learned, the chameleon unleashes an array of stolen martial arts prowess, cycling through the formidable styles of Poe's past adversaries. The coiled aggression of Tai Lung, the precise strikes of Master Viper, the overwhelming force of Kai. Poe, momentarily overwhelmed by this spectral gallery of past defeats, remembers a fundamental truth taught by Shifu during one of his lowest moments. The most powerful style is the one that is authentically yours. He stops trying to counter each borrowed move individually and instead embraces his own unorthodox, messy, and joyful style, the style of the Dragon Warrior, which incorporates everything he has learned without being bound by any single form. It is fueled by instinct and a whole lot of noodles. Rather than betraying Poe as he had feared, she uses her intimate knowledge of the city's hidden passages and her own unique dexterity, skills learned out of survival, to disrupt the chameleon's concentration at a critical moment. It is a subtle act of heroism, a moment of perfect timing that requires more finesse than brute strength, proving that strength comes in many forms, not just the well-defined movements of traditional kung fu. She chooses allegiance when it matters most. With the chameleon temporarily subdued, Po recognizes that Jen, despite her questionable past and her pragmatic approach to morality, possesses the spirit of a protector, albeit one forged in the hard alleys rather than the peaceful courtyards of the Jade Palace. Po doesn't just appoint her, he invites her to understand the role, offering her a genuine place at the table. He realizes that his successor doesn't need to be a perfect mirror of himself, the embodiment of every lesson learned in sequence, but someone capable of adapting and evolving the legacy through their own lived experience. Shifu, observing from a distance, his face a landscape of quiet contemplation, nods almost imperceptibly, a gesture that confirms Po has finally understood the essence of true spiritual succession. It requires vulnerability and the courage to let go, to trust the future to imperfect hands. The valley is safe, and Po, having found a potential heir whose path diverges wildly from his own, is ready to embrace the next, quieter chapter of his incredible adventure, perhaps finally having time to perfect a few new dumpling recipes. The journey back to the Jade Palace is one of measured silence, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy that usually follows Po. The weight of the Dragon Warrior mantle has, for the first time, begun to feel less like a comfortable heavy cloak and more like a key he is finally ready to hand over. Po finds himself viewing the familiar peaks and valleys with a fresh perspective, realizing how much of his focus had been externally directed, fighting villains, perfecting moves, and how little on the internal cultivation of leadership. Jen walks beside him, still reserved, occasionally offering a dry observation about a particularly well-maintained section of road, an acknowledgement of order she is only just beginning to appreciate. She carries herself differently now. The ingrained habit of looking over her shoulder for trouble has been replaced, tentatively, by the posture of someone being watched for potential. Master Shifu meets them not with grand fanfare, but in the quiet, contemplative space of the Hall of Warriors, where the statues of previous masters stand sentinel. Shifu's greeting is economical, a slight bow that speaks volumes. He doesn't immediately address Jen's past, nor does he dwell on the recent victory. Instead, he focuses on Po. He observes that Po, the dragon warrior who once struggled to grasp the simplest concept of focus, is now exhibiting the highest form of focus, selfless delegation. Shifu gently reminds Po that the spiritual leader's true art lies not in demonstrating the wuxi fingerhold, but in nurturing the soil from which the next generation of protectors will grow. This recognition from Shifu, the master who once saw Po as a potential disaster, means more to Po than any accolade. It confirms that his clumsy, passionate attempts at mentorship have finally yielded something authentic. Zhen, in turn, begins her tentative integration. She approaches the ancient texts and the training dummies with the same analytical curiosity she applied to picking locks. She doesn't rush into the high-level forms, sensing the deep history embedded in them. Instead, she finds solace in the foundational exercises, the ones that emphasize balance and efficient movement, skills she already possesses instinctively but lacks the philosophical framework for. Po finds himself teaching her not just how to move, but why the masters moved the way they did, tying the crane stance to the memory of stillness, the tiger claw to the necessity of protection. It is a slow thaw. Zhen's initial skepticism softens into a guarded respect as she realizes the masters of the palace, despite their high walls, are not detached from the struggles of the outside world, but deeply invested in them. Po understands that his primary task now is not to train a warrior identical to himself, but to give Zhen the context and confidence to become the protector the valley needs her to be, whoever that may ultimately turn out to be. The future, Po realizes with a deep, satisfied breath, is beautifully uncertain. The mountains, usually symbols of impossible heights to conquer, now seem like sturdy foundations upon which new structures can be built. She carries herself differently now. The ingrained habit of looking over her shoulder for trouble, the constant alertness of the scavenger, has been replaced, tentatively, by the posture of someone being watched for potential. a subtle shift that Po recognizes as the first sign of trust taking root. Master Shifu meets them not with grand fanfare, but in the quiet contemplative space of the Hall of Warriors, where the statues of previous masters stand sentinel, their stone eyes seemingly assessing the new arrangement. Shifu's greeting is economical, a slight bow that speaks volumes, a gesture of profound acceptance without needing excessive verbal affirmation. He doesn't immediately address Gen's past, nor does he dwell on the recent victory, understanding that dwelling on crisis only reinforces old habits. Shifu gently reminds Po that the spiritual leader's true art lies not in demonstrating the wuxi finger hold, a power he famously mastered, but in nurturing the soil from which the next generation of protectors will grow. This recognition from Shifu, the master who once saw Po as a potential disaster held together by sheer luck and noodle consumption, means more to Po than any accolade. It confirms that his clumsy, passionate, and often self-doubting attempts at mentorship have finally yielded something authentic. He is learning to be a teacher by learning to step aside. Zhen, in turn, begins her tentative integration into the palace's rhythm. She approaches the ancient texts and the worn training dummies with the same analytical curiosity she applied to picking locks or surveying potential escape routes from a tight spot. She doesn't rush into the high-level, flowery forms, sensing the deep, almost sacred history embedded in them. She recognizes that rushing mastery often leads to structural weakness. Instead, she finds solace in the foundational exercises, the core drills that emphasize balance, weight distribution, and efficient movement, skills she already possesses instinctively due to years of surviving on precarious rooftops, but lacks the philosophical framework for. Po finds himself teaching her not just how to move, but why the masters moved the way they did, tying the crane stance to the necessity of achieving perfect stillness before action, the tiger claw to the primal requirement of defense for the vulnerable. It is a slow thaw. Zhen's initial skepticism, the ingrained belief that all kindness comes with a hidden price tag, softens into a guarded respect as she realizes the masters of the palace, despite their high, protective walls, are not detached from the struggles of the outside world, but deeply invested in safeguarding it. Po understands that his primary task now is not to mold a warrior identical to himself, the loud, dumpling-loving force of nature, but to give Zhen the context and confidence to become the protector the valley needs her to be, utilizing her unique street-honed perspective. The future, Po realizes with a deep, satisfied breath that smells faintly of peace, and perhaps a hint of chili oil, is beautifully uncertain, and for the first time, he is excited by that uncertainty. The slow integration process reveals deeper layers in both teacher and student, especially as Po begins to actively divest himself of the pressures of constant vigilance. He starts delegating minor administrative duties, overseeing inventory of training silks, mediating disputes between minor temple attendants, tasks he previously would have obsessed over personally. Convinced only his own meticulousness could prevent disaster, he finds an unexpected satisfaction in these small acts of letting go, realizing that true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of reliable systems. He often retreats to the kitchen during these low-stress periods, not just for sustenance, but because the rhythmic work of kneading dough or chopping vegetables offers a grounding simplicity that centers his thoughts better than any meditation cushion. Zhen, meanwhile, finds the sheer scale of the Jade Palace overwhelming. The quiet is oppressive at first, a vacuum where the constant noise of the city used to be, masking threats. She catches herself standing guard near her assigned quarters during the night, listening to the wind rustle the bamboo, an ingrained habit of the hunted. Po notices this one morning when he finds her practicing shadow strikes in the early dawn light, her movements fluid but edged with unnecessary tension. He doesn't criticize the technique. Instead, he brings her a small, heavy stone, worn smooth by river water, a training tool used by the Furious Five in their early days. "Feel this?" Po instructs gently. "It's heavy. Grounded. When the world feels too big, Too noisy? Hold this. It's real. The noise isn't. This small, tangible gift, a piece of the palace's history offered without expectation, cracks Jen's composure slightly. She grips the stone, the weight settling her, and for the first time she offers a genuine, unguarded smile, a fleeting glimpse of the person she might become when survival isn't the primary motivation. Shifu watches these interactions with the nuanced approval of an old general, seeing his strategies finally enacted perfectly by a new recruit. He sees Po moving past the need to be the center of every heroic narrative. The greatest lesson Shifu ever taught Po was to find the hero within. Now, Po is learning the higher art of creating an environment where another hero can emerge without needing to be a mirror image of the first. Shifu understands that Jen's path will inevitably involve moments where she must bend the rules Po rigorously upheld, but he trusts Po's judgment, a judgment now tempered by experience and empathy rather than just protocol. The palace, for the first time since Po's arrival, feels less like a repository of ancient power waiting to be defended, and more like a living, evolving heart preparing for a future guided by both wisdom and necessary street smarts. The evolution of Zhen's presence within the palace begins to affect the established routine of the others, particularly the Furious Five, who observe this unlikely partnership with a mixture of cautious curiosity and guarded respect. Tigress, ever the stoic guardian, initially treats Zhen with the reserved coolness usually reserved for unvetted foreign dignitaries. She finds Zhen's reliance on trickery and her cavalier attitude toward formal structure deeply irritating, seeing in her a faint echo of the chaotic element that Po himself once represented. During one joint training session, where Po encourages Zhen to demonstrate her unique city-honed evasion techniques, Tigress's frustration boils over. She challenges Zhen, not with anger, but with the pure, unwavering pressure of her perfected martial discipline. It is a test of philosophy as much as fighting skill. Tigress moves with the inevitability of a collapsing mountain, expecting Zhen to use speed or deceit. Instead, Zhen utilizes the environment in a way Tigress never would consider. She leverages the slight unevenness of the courtyard stones, the angle of the midday sun creating temporary blindness, and a burst of distracting noise simulated by striking a resonant gong with calculated offbeat timing. She doesn't defeat Tigress, but she successfully evades capture and forces a stalemate, disappearing briefly into the shadows before reappearing to bow formally. Tigress is left momentarily breathless, not from exertion, but from the sheer unexpectedness of the approach. Later, Tigress seeks out Po, not to complain, but to ask a single question. Does she truly understand the responsibility, or is this still a game to her? Po replies honestly, reflecting on his own early days when fighting was often just the most exciting way to pass the time. She understands survival, Tigress. Responsibility is the luxury of safety. We have to show her safety is worth protecting, not just surviving within. Meanwhile, Po's personal commitment to his new role intensifies as he realizes that mentorship requires vulnerability. He starts sharing anecdotes not of his grand victories, but of his most embarrassing failures. The time he confused the sacred scrolls with takeout menus, the early, disastrous attempts at meditation where he only managed to levitate his own lunch. These stories, told with his signature self-deprecating humor, begin to chip away at Zhen's protective shell. She starts to see that the Dragon Warrior, the legend, is built on a foundation of mistakes overcome, not flawless execution. This mutual vulnerability starts to form a bond that supersedes the master-apprentice dynamic. Zhen starts referring to Shifu as the tiny, angry red one when talking to Po privately, a sign that she is finally comfortable enough to use the casual language of familiarity, a small victory for Po's attempts to make the ancient halls feel less intimidating. The growing comfort between Po and Zhen is palpable, a gentle hum beneath the ancient stones of the palace, but this very burgeoning trust draws the attention of enemies both seen and unseen. While the Furious Five adjust their perceptions, a subtle spiritual disturbance begins to ripple through the Valley of Peace, a faint discoloration in the otherwise pristine chi flow that Po, as the spiritual leader, is now attuned to. It is not the overt threat of the chameleon, who remains dormant after her defeat, but something far more insidious, a lingering resonance of stolen power and corrupted technique. Po realizes with a jolt that, while the chameleon was defeated, the stolen essence of the past masters she briefly possessed hasn't simply vanished. It's dispersed, clinging like toxic residue to the spiritual landscape. This manifests in minor, unsettling ways. Crane finds his perfect aerial balance momentarily skewed by phantom weight. Mantis's renowned precision falters during crucial moments, as if an unseen force is mimicking his movements with a slight delay. These aren't attacks, but echoes, a spiritual feedback loop created by the chaotic mingling of borrowed powers. Po feels a deep, visceral responsibility for this spectral pollution. Shifu, whose insight into the ethereal is unmatched, confirms Po's fears. The spiritual fabric needs cleansing, a deep, focused, meditative effort that requires tapping into the purest source of their own chi, untainted by external influences. Po understands this requires a level of spiritual focus he hasn't achieved since accepting the mantle, far surpassing the physical demands of battle. He tries to guide Jen through a preliminary exercise, asking her to sit quietly and feel the energy of the earth beneath her. Jen attempts it, her brow furrowed in intense concentration, but her fox instincts keep pulling her back to external awareness, listening for footsteps, judging ambient temperature, assessing threats. Frustrated, she snaps the focus, declaring, "I can't feel the earth, Po. I can only feel the urge to climb something tall and see who's watching." Po, instead of chastising her for failing the test of stillness, laughs heartily. He remembers his own early struggles with meditation, often ending up dreaming of dumplings. He realizes that Jen's grounding isn't found in stillness, but in focused action, her survival mechanism now needing redirection, not suppression. The solution, Po concludes, must blend the traditional cleansing ritual with Jen's practical, results-oriented mindset. He decides they must perform a joint spiritual grounding ceremony, but instead of sitting cross-legged in silent meditation, they will move, a controlled, deliberate form of martial art synchronized perfectly to the rhythms of the valley's chi. Po will teach her a slow, flowing style emphasizing connection and harmony, something that resembles Tai Chi but moves with the defensive precision Jen excels at. It's a synthesis of the palace's ancient wisdom and Zhen's new pragmatic understanding of the world, a testament to the fact that legacy doesn't have to be rigid, it must be adaptable to the hands that carry it forward. The synthesis of ancient ceremony and street-honed pragmatism begins in the quietest corner of the Jade Palace grounds, a hidden bamboo grove that Shifu rarely visits, sensing it as a space Po needs to claim for his own unique style of leadership. Po designs the grounding movement not as a rigid kata, but as a fluid, defensive dance. He calls it the river's flow, incorporating low stances that mirror Jen's practiced stealth and wide sweeping movements that represent cleansing away stagnant energy. Po moves with a genuine, unrestrained joy. For him, this practice is a return to the essence of what he loves, moving well, feeling connected, and sharing that feeling. His enthusiasm is infectious, a warm light pushing back the spiritual chill that has settled over the valley. Jen struggles initially with the emotional commitment required. She can replicate the mechanics perfectly. Her muscle memory is sharp enough to mimic the movements flawlessly, but when Po asks her to visualize the negative energy leaving her body with each outward motion, her face remains a mask of detached concentration. "I'm picturing the energy as a stack of unpaid debts, Po," she admits dryly, "and I'm pushing them onto the next guy." Po recognizes this transactional view of spiritual release. It's how she survived. He gently redirects her visualization. "Don't think of what you're giving away, Jen. Think of what you're making room for." Think of the first quiet night you slept without worrying about a guard finding you. That space is what you're carving out now. This reframing clicks. Jen closes her eyes, and the next time she executes the sweeping block, the tension in her shoulders visibly eases. A faint, almost imperceptible golden aura, pure, focused intention, flickers around her hands. This is the moment Shifu has been waiting for. He steps out from the shadows of the grove, his silence more potent than any lecture. He nods toward Po, acknowledging that the dragon warrior has finally mastered the lesson of allowing others to teach him about teaching. Po, seeing Shifu's approval, feels a profound sense of completion. He hasn't just found a successor, he has successfully translated his own chaotic journey into a usable language for someone else. The spiritual cleansing continues through the day, a meditative marathon that slowly begins to restore balance, powered by the unlikely symbiotic rhythm of the panda and the fox, learning how to truly protect a shared peace. The slow, deliberate practice of the river's flow ritual becomes their shared language, a non-verbal contract being drawn between Po and Jen. For Po, the act of teaching this fluid defense is revelatory. He realizes that his own fighting style, which always appeared as a collection of happy accidents and sheer willpower, possesses a deep, underlying logic rooted in adaptability. He sees his past self in Jen's initial rigid focus, the belief that one must master a single, perfect form to be safe. Now he champions the beauty of imperfection, the strength found in being able to change the form instantly. He finds himself more energized by this act of legacy transfer than he was by any recent physical sparring. Jen, immersed in the continuous rhythmic movement, starts to shed the armor of perpetual suspicion. The repeated visualization of clearing space allows her mind to settle into a state she never thought possible. A state where stillness isn't a precursor to danger, but a source of genuine power. Her movements become less about deflecting a blow and more about guiding the surrounding energy. During a particularly long sequence where the sun tracked across the grove, she finds herself anticipating Po's next move, not by observing his muscles, but by sensing the slight shift in his breath. A true mastery of chi awareness that surprises even herself. This intuitive understanding prompts a rare moment of unprompted reflection from her. She quietly tells Po that in the city, every successful maneuver was a solitary victory, a means to secure the next meal or escape the next threat. Here, the success is communal, woven into the air they breathe. This subtle acknowledgement of shared destiny moves Po deeply. It is the first time Jen has spoken about her past life with anything other than defensive sarcasm. Shifu, observing from a distance as the golden ripples of focused chi stabilize the grove, finally speaks to Po alone once the ritual concludes, the bamboo leaves settling back into their quiet patterns. "You were worried you could not lead without swinging a fist," the master remarks, his voice softer than usual. "But you have learned that the greatest strength of a warrior is the ability to empower the strength in another. You have not just found a successor, you have built a new foundation entirely." This compliment, earned not through a difficult training montage, but through patient, empathetic guidance, fills Po with a quiet warmth that eclipses the satisfaction of any battle roar. He understands that his role as spiritual leader is not to be the ultimate fighter, but the ultimate catalyst. With Jen beginning to internalize the protective spirit of the valley, Po feels the last of the crushing pressure lift, replaced by the profound, comforting realization that the story of the Valley of Peace will continue, messy, surprising, and ultimately safe in hands that have learned to trust in collaboration. With the spiritual residue cleared and a tentative, harmonious rhythm established between teacher and student, Po feels a significant internal shift. The dragon warrior's duties, once all-consuming, now feel like a well-worn pair of comfortable, slightly smelly slippers he can slip into when needed, rather than the restrictive armor he once wore. he begins to actively embrace the spiritual leader aspect of his dual role, focusing on fostering community resilience rather than just individual defense. This manifests in surprising ways. Po starts hosting wisdom walk sessions, where he encourages citizens from all corners of the valley, farmers, merchants, even reformed petty thieves like Jen's old acquaintances, to share their practical wisdom alongside the Kung Fu teachings. He insists that a well-tended field and a fair trade agreement are just as vital to peace as a perfect roundhouse kick. Jen, exposed to this broader view of peace, starts to find purpose beyond mere self-preservation. She proves invaluable in the wisdom walk sessions, using her street smarts to translate the often esoteric teachings of the masters into actionable advice for the common folk. For instance, when Po struggled to explain the concept of patience during a harvest dispute, Jen stepped in, framing it as waiting for the market price to peak, a concept everyone instantly grasped. Her transition is marked by a slight softening of her features. The perpetually guarded tightness around her eyes begins to relax, replaced by a thoughtful focus. She still carries the smooth riverstone Po gave her, but now she keeps it in a pouch on her belt, not clutched tightly in her fist. This new era of proactive community building is abruptly interrupted by a chilling, undeniable sign that the past is not quite finished with them. It begins with a series of intricate, meticulously planned burglaries across the valley, but not of valuables. The targets are specific: minor, forgotten artifacts housed in small, local shrines, items deemed useless by the Jade Palace archives, but spiritually significant to specific families or villages. The thief leaves no trace, no struggle, operating with a precision that suggests intimate knowledge of local security vulnerabilities. It's too organized for common bandits, and too targeted to be random chaos. Po immediately feels a cold dread. This is the work of someone who learned their skills from the masters whose power the chameleon briefly absorbed, but this new perpetrator is not interested in grand power grabs. They are systematically gathering pieces. Po and Jen investigate the latest site, a small shrine dedicated to the Master of Illusion. What they find is not a forced entry, but a subtle rearrangement of the existing dust patterns, indicating entry through an overlooked structural weakness. Jen kneels down, examining the tiny scuff marks invisible to the naked eye. "This isn't a fighter," she whispers, her voice tight with professional assessment. "This is a scholar of security, someone who studies weaknesses like I used to study escape routes. And they know exactly where to look, Po. They're collecting the discarded thoughts, the forgotten fragments of power." Po realizes with a heavy heart that defeating the chameleon was merely pruning the branch. This new threat is digging for the root, exploiting the very weaknesses the master's spectral imprints left behind. The relaxed atmosphere of succession training shatters, replaced by the sharp focus of a new intellectual hunt. This new insidious threat immediately refocuses Po's attention, wrenching him from the serene satisfaction of mentorship back into the role of frontline defender, albeit a more thoughtful one this time. The methodical nature of the thefts suggests a mind that values information and infrastructure over raw confrontation, a villain who studies failure rather than seeks domination. Po feels a familiar spike of anxiety mixed with a strange excitement. This adversary requires strategy, not just brute force, demanding that he fully utilize the analytical skills Jen has helped him hone. Jen becomes Po's indispensable anchor in this investigation. Her entire career was predicated on understanding the flow of a secured environment, anticipating the guard's next patrol, and knowing which seemingly solid wall hid a hollow space. She approaches the crime scenes like forensic puzzles, tracing the thief's meticulous path. "They aren't breaking in, Po," she states after examining the latest scene, tracing a line on the dusty floor with her finger. "They are slipping in." Every technique they use is about maximizing efficiency with minimum footprint, the opposite of your Dragon Warrior style, but terrifyingly effective when applied to larceny. Her focus is razor-sharp, reminiscent of her early days, but now it is channeled constructively, driven by a genuine desire to protect the community she is slowly allowing herself to belong to. Their investigation leads them through the lower levels of the valley, old forgotten tunnels and disused supply routes that the city dwellers built centuries ago and subsequently forgot. Po, who usually navigates by the scent of noodles or the direction of the nearest fight, is utterly lost in the maze of damp stone and tight passages. Here, Jen is supreme. She moves through the darkness with an almost supernatural grace, her low profile and keen hearing guiding them. She navigates by echoes and air currents, pointing out tripwires that are almost invisible, or listening to the faint drip of water that reveals the structure of an unseen chamber. Po, lumbering behind her, finds himself frequently relying on her literal light and her sharp instincts, feeling oddly humbled by how much specialized knowledge exists outside the purview of the Jade Palace scrolls. He has to consciously suppress the urge to barge through obstacles, trusting Jen's whispered instruction to wait for the perfect, silent moment. The tension mounts as they realize the scope of the collection. The thief isn't just stealing objects. They are gathering implements that resonate with specific emotional or practical applications. A mirror used for illusionary practice, a tuning fork used by a master of sound manipulation, a hinge from a door that only opened when the correct philosophical key was spoken. It becomes clear this new antagonist is attempting to reconstruct something, perhaps even assembling a composite power from the scattered echoes left by the chameleon's defeat, an attempt to forge a perfect stable weapon from unstable spiritual energy. Po understands the terrible irony. In defeating the shapeshifter, they had inadvertently created the perfect opportunity for a methodical collector to glean the leftover power fragments. The stakes are no longer just about stopping a villain. It's about preventing the permanent corruption of the valley's entire martial history. The labyrinthine tunnels beneath the valley press in on them, the stale air thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten history. For Po, the darkness is a physical opponent, amplifying his anxiety. He relies entirely on Jen, whose fox eyes seem to absorb the meager light, turning the oppressive blackness into a navigable twilight. He walks closer behind her than he ever has in a fight, his usual booming presence reduced to the soft padding of heavy paws. This reliance is a crucial step in his growth. He is learning that vulnerability in leadership is not weakness, but the necessary invitation for specialized support. He feels a growing, fierce protectiveness toward Jen, not just because she is his potential successor, but because she is willingly exposing the skills she spent a lifetime hiding, trusting him not to judge the necessary grit of her past. Jen, acutely aware of Po's reliance, steps into her role with sober focus. Her usual flippancy is gone, replaced by a steely professionalism. When they reach a juncture where 3 tunnels diverge, she doesn't look for footprints. She presses her ear to the cold stone wall, listening. "The 3rd tunnel," she murmurs, her voice barely disturbing the silence. There's a change in the ambient vibration, a rhythm that isn't natural water flow. Someone passed through recently, and they were trying to mask their footfalls, but they were too heavy-handed with the masking technique. Po realizes she is not just hearing. She is analyzing the residual energy signature of the thief's failed stealth attempt, reading the environment like a complex security schematic. As they press deeper, they encounter the thief's calling card, a small, perfectly carved wooden fox, placed deliberately on a crumbling pillar. It is a mocking signature, a direct acknowledgement of Jen's presence. Jen stops dead, her breath hitching. The casual indifference evaporates, replaced by a raw, exposed anger that Po has never witnessed. "This isn't just some scavenger," she hisses, her voice vibrating with sudden personal stakes. "This is someone who knows my history. They know the symbols of the city's shadow networks." She recognizes the artistry. It belongs to a specific cadre of highly specialized thieves she once associated with. individuals who fetishized the mastery of others. The realization hits Po like a physical blow. The thief isn't just collecting fragments of kung fu power, they are collecting components to build a perfect mimicry of someone specific, perhaps aiming to recreate the very style of chaos that forged Jen. The chase takes a personal turn. Po sees the haunted look in Jen's eyes, the fear of being defined by the life she desperately tried to escape. He reaches out, his large paw resting gently on her shoulder. "Jen," he says firmly, his voice resonating with unexpected spiritual clarity. "Whatever this ghost is trying to build, it is a copy. It's bound by the rules of the past. You are adapting. You are the one moving forward." This declaration, a public validation of her evolution, spoken in the oppressive darkness, galvanizes her. Her anger hardens into resolve. She snatches up the wooden fox, not out of greed, but to deny the thief ownership of the symbol. "Then let's show this collector what happens when you try to assemble a legacy you don't understand," she declares, turning down the third tunnel with renewed, decisive speed. Po follows, no longer lost, but wholly committed to protecting the future they are building together, even if it means diving headfirst into the shadows of Jen's forgotten world. The latest installment in the beloved animated franchise, Kung Fu Panda 4, endeavors to chart a new trajectory for Po, the Dragon Warrior, while navigating the inherent challenges of continuing a story whose central conflict, Po's self-doubt culminating in mastery, felt thoroughly resolved in the preceding entries. This film positions Po at a curious professional crossroads. Having achieved the status of spiritual leader, the mantle of Grand Master looms large, suggesting an evolution beyond mere martial prowess into a purely philosophical role. This shift immediately introduces a fascinating tension. Po, whose character arc has always thrived on physical action, clumsy application of wisdom, and relatable gluttony, is now expected to embody serene detachment. The narrative skillfully juxtaposes this impending administrative elevation with the introduction of the Chameleon, a villain whose power lies precisely in appropriation rather than pure originality. The Chameleon's ability to absorb and utilize the skills of past masters, Tai Lung, Lord Shen, Kai, is not merely a threat to the Valley of Peace, it is a direct philosophical challenge to Po's legacy. In earlier films, the antagonists represented external forces that forced Po to grow into the role he was destined for. Here, the threat is existential. If Po's greatest victories can be instantly replicated by someone else, what is the intrinsic value of his own accumulated experience? This central conflict is effectively externalized through the introduction of Zhen, a sharp-witted, morally ambiguous fox character hailing from the criminal underbelly of a bustling city. Zhen serves as Po's necessary foil, mirroring the rogue element that Po himself once represented before his enlightenment. Her cynicism and street smarts contrast sharply with Po's increasingly spiritualized worldview. For Po, whose foundational training under Shifu involved learning discipline, humility, and the power of nothingness, as exemplified by the secret of the Dragon Scroll, Zhen represents the untamed potential of instinct. Her character implicitly asks, is true mastery achieved through rigorous adherence to tradition, or through necessary adaptation and cunning? DreamWorks. Animation continues to refine its visual language, presenting action sequences that are both kinetic and emotionally resonant. The fight choreography, while necessarily simplified for Po's unique doughy physiology, retains the exhilarating weight and impact established in the first film, drawing heavily from wuxia cinema traditions. However, the use of the chameleon's mimicry allows for moments of visual spectacle, flashing through past iconic fighting styles, which serves as a nostalgic nod to longtime fans while simultaneously driving the plot. Po cannot win by simply mimicking his predecessors. He must find a new way. Po's internal struggle mirrors the broader theme of mentorship and succession. Shifu, having guided Po from clumsy novice to venerable master, is now ready to pass the torch. This transition resonates deeply with the evolution of many real-world artistic lineages. Just as legendary actors or musicians often face a dilemma when their successors attempt to honor their style while forging a new path, Poe must accept that the Dragon Warrior title is not a fixed monument, but a fluid concept. His journey here is about realizing that becoming the spiritual leader means relinquishing the need to be the primary physical protector. The film's emotional core hinges on Poe accepting that his true power lies not in the specific moves he executes, but in the belief he inspires in others, particularly Zhen. By trusting her despite her questionable past, a lesson he learned arduously himself when dealing with allies and enemies alike in previous adventures, Poe demonstrates the higher-level wisdom required of a Grand Master. He is no longer just fighting with Kung Fu, he is teaching the philosophy of resourcefulness. The ultimate resolution, where Poe chooses to remain the Dragon Warrior alongside a new protector rather than fully retreating into administrative sanctity, feels earned. It reaffirms the central thesis of the franchise. The greatest achievement is not becoming something new, but fully inhabiting and evolving the role one was uniquely suited for all along. The film wisely concludes that legacy isn't about passing a title, but about nurturing the next generation's capacity for heroism. The emotional texture of this fourth chapter is notably different from the pure quest for validation that propelled the original, where the first film was steeped in the anxiety of inadequacy, and the sequels explored confronting external embodiments of trauma. Kung Fu Panda 4 settles into the quiet, perhaps slightly uncomfortable reality of professional plateau. Poe, voiced with his trademark joyful sincerity, now carries the weight of expectation, a burden far heavier than any enemy could inflict physically. His earlier struggles were externalized, overcoming Tai Lung's rage or Lord Shen's nihilism. Now, the conflict is internalized, manifesting as a subtle fear of obsolescence. He loves the physicality of his role, the direct application of disciplined energy, and the idea of trading that for endless council meetings and meditative retreats feels like a slow erasure of self. This internal grappling is beautifully mirrored in the design and execution of the chameleon. She is not driven by a hunger for dominion, as Kai was, nor by revenge like Shen. Her motivation is a chillingly modern form of professional envy, the desire to possess the accumulated capital of legendary achievement without having done the work. When she deploys the mantis's speed or the tiger's brute strength, it is unsettling because it highlights the perceived superficiality of mastery. It suggests that skill is just a set of transferable data points, easily copied. This forces Poe to defend the ineffable quality of his own journey, the sheer, messy effort, the embarrassing failures, and the moments of pure, unscripted breakthrough that cannot be downloaded. Zhen, the street-smart pangolin, is the necessary abrasive agent to polish Poe's philosophical complacency. Her backstory, hinted at through her survival instincts, suggests a life where Kung Fu was not an art form taught by a serene master, but a necessary tool for extraction and evasion. Her skepticism regarding destiny and prophecy, concepts Poe built his entire existence upon, is a sharp corrective. Poe's relationship with her progresses not through grand combat demonstrations, but through moments of shared vulnerability, Poe admitting his anxiety about his new spiritual duties, and Zhen slowly revealing the limits of pure self-reliance. It is a mentor-student dynamic inverted. Poe needs Zhen to remind him how to be scrappy, while Zhen needs Poe to show her that true strength involves protecting something external to herself. Shifu's role in this transition is understated but crucial. He is the ultimate example of the master who understands when to step aside. His quiet confidence in Poe's eventual decision grounds the narrative. He has already navigated this shift himself, moving from teacher to advisor. Shifu doesn't push Poe toward the administrative role. He merely presents the options, acknowledging that Poe's gifts have expanded beyond the physical techniques he taught him in the Jade Palace training hall. Shifu's enduring belief isn't in Poe's ability to perform the crane stance perfectly, but in Poe's inherent capacity for compassion, the quality that truly defines a grand master over a mere dragon warrior. The film culminates not in a flawless execution of a signature move, but in an act of profound trust and teaching. Poe's final victory relies on Jen utilizing her own unique cunning, augmented by a piece of wisdom Poe imparts, the very essence of adaptation. It's the culmination of Poe realizing that the Dragon Scroll's nothingness wasn't emptiness, but infinite potential, something the chameleon, obsessed with fixed forms, could never replicate. The visual spectacle of the final confrontation cleverly incorporates these echoes of past masters, but the true power lies in Poe accepting his role as the conduit, the one who enables others to become their best selves, rather than remaining the singular, untouchable powerhouse. This evolution solidifies the franchise's enduring appeal. It is a story about becoming the best version of yourself, even when that version looks nothing like what you initially expected. The thematic weight carried by Poe in this fourth iteration stems directly from the audience's prior investment in his victories. Having defeated foes who represented ego, nihilism, and sheer destructive force, Poe now faces the most insidious enemy, the fear that his life's work might be ultimately interchangeable. This anxiety is palpable beneath his usual layers of jovial enthusiasm. His internal monologue, often expressed through expressive, almost theatrical physical comedy, speaks to a deep-seated reluctance to trade the kinetic satisfaction of sparring for the stillness of spiritual authority. He is a creature built for momentum, and the prospect of enforced contemplation clashes with the very essence of his being, which was forged in the fires of necessity and relentless, clumsy practice under Shifu's exacting eye. The dynamic between Poe and Jen is richly textured, moving beyond simple good cop, bad cop, or student-mentor tropes. Jen embodies a pragmatism born from scarcity. Her past interactions with authority figures, likely marked by exploitation or misunderstanding, have conditioned her to trust only verifiable results and her own quick wits. Poe, whose entire belief system rests on faith in destiny, inner peace, and the guidance of venerated seniors, finds this skepticism profoundly challenging. When Jen scoffs at the idea of chi or inner power, she is essentially questioning the very foundations of Poe's identity. His attempts to teach her often manifest as over-enthusiastic, slightly misapplied maxims learned from Shifu, which Jen then instantly dismantles with street-level logic. This friction is productive. It forces Poe to translate esoteric wisdom into tangible, actionable advice, a skill far more useful for an incoming Grand Master than simply reciting ancient scrolls. Visually, the introduction of the large, vibrant city setting where Jen resides provides a necessary contrast to the familiar, pastoral serenity of the Jade Palace and the Valley of Peace. This urban sprawl represents chaos, opportunity, and moral ambiguity, a world where survival often necessitates bending the rules Poe has spent decades learning to honor. When the chameleon successfully mimics the devastating power of Kai, the sheer weight of that spectral jade form against Poe's inherently soft and yielding body underscores the theme of imitation versus authenticity. Kai's strength was rooted in stealing souls. The chameleon merely steals the skin of that power. Poe's eventual triumph must, therefore, rely on a quality that cannot be stolen, the genuine empathetic connection he fosters with Jen, which is an outgrowth of his own flawed, deeply human journey. Shifu's wisdom here operates on a level beyond direct intervention. He is a silent observer, content in the knowledge that he has succeeded in creating a warrior flexible enough to redefine his own role. His quiet pride when Poe shows true strategic empathy, choosing to trust Jen's unconventional approach over a predictable, formalized defense, is the film's most satisfying emotional beat related to mentorship. It confirms that Shifu's greatest lesson was not how to strike, but how to lead with wisdom gleaned from error. Poe's final decision to share the Dragon Warrior title, rather than hoard the mantle of power, is the definitive proof of his ascension. He has internalized that true strength is distributed, not centralized, resolving the inherent tension of being the chosen one by choosing to empower others instead of remaining perpetually singular. The film beautifully illustrates that mastery is not the end point of training, but the beginning of selfless teaching. The exploration of legacy extends beyond the main trio, touching upon the implicit narrative burden carried by the supporting figures of the Furious Five, even in their reduced on-screen presence. Tigress, Monkey, Viper, Crane, and Mantis, characters whose own development was carefully charted across the first three films, now serve as powerful, yet somewhat static symbols of the established order Poe is preparing to leave behind. Their continued commitment to the defense of the valley highlights the stability Poe has created, but also underscores the vacuum his potential departure would create. Their loyalty is absolute, yet their martial styles, once revolutionary and deeply personal to their individual animal forms and philosophical leanings, are now rendered momentarily obsolete by the chameleon's indiscriminate copying. This briefly places the ensemble in a position of shared vulnerability, forcing the audience to recognize that even established perfection can be temporarily undermined by radical technological or magical appropriation. Their function in this installment pivots from being Poe's sparring partners and co-defenders to being the institutional framework that Poe must learn to lead from afar. Their presence reaffirms the stakes. It is not just Poe's title at risk, but the entire established ecosystem of disciplined peace he helped build through years of dedicated training and mutual respect. The very effectiveness of their established techniques serves as a temptation for Poe, the easy route back to physical heroism, which he must consciously resist to fully embrace his future responsibilities as a spiritual guide. This subtle reinforcement of the Five's established brilliance acts as a necessary anchor, preventing Poe's new journey from feeling entirely unmoored from the established world of martial artistry. The underutilization of the Furious Five in a direct confrontation with the chameleon is perhaps the film's most telling structural choice regarding Poe's maturation. In previous narratives, the Five were indispensable. Their combined skills represented the pinnacle of conventional martial arts mastery. Here, however, their very reliance on perfected, recognizable forms makes them predictable targets for the chameleon. When the villain flashes through the distinct, powerful silhouettes of Tigress's focused aggression or Crane's aerial grace, it serves less as a genuine threat to the Five themselves and more as a demonstration of the villain's analytical superiority over established dogma. This narrative decision effectively sidelines the ensemble, forcing the spotlight entirely onto Poe's need for a novel solution. It signals that the conventional tools, even the finest craftsmanship inherited from Shifu, are insufficient against a threat that weaponizes historical precedent. The Five become living monuments to the martial past, while Poe must forge the fighting philosophy of the future. Their quiet observation from the sidelines speaks volumes about the necessary isolation of true leadership. Sometimes the greatest warriors must step back so that the greatest leader can emerge, proving that leadership isn't about the strength of one's own punch, but the strength of the strategies one inspires in others. This subtle sidelining gently redirects the audience's focus, ensuring that the film's climax hinges purely on Poe's capacity for adaptive empathy and trust, qualities that cannot be mimicked by copying a move sequence. The introduction of the criminal metropolis where Jen operates offers a necessary, almost jarring, textural shift from the familiar bamboo forests and terracotta rooftops of the valley. This city is a sprawling testament to unchecked ambition, a vibrant, chaotic ecosystem where every shadow hides a potential deal or double cross. It is the antithesis of the ordered harmony Poe strives to maintain, serving as a visual metaphor for the moral gray area Poe must navigate when dealing with Jen. Poe's attempts to apply the high-minded moral lessons learned from the ancient masters within this environment consistently fall flat, emphasizing his initial naivete regarding the necessity of expediency. He is utterly out of his element, his bulk and bright colors making him an obvious target, contrasting sharply with Jen's sleek, low-profile movements, perfectly suited for urban evasion. Her survival instincts are honed not by chi cultivation, but by the constant calculation of risk versus reward in a world where benevolence is often mistaken for weakness. This environment allows the audience to see Poe's inherent kindness not as a given, but as a conscious, often risky, choice he must make, thereby elevating the stakes of his own ethical framework. Jen's eventual softening is thus more impactful. It is not conversion to Poe's philosophy, but an earned partnership where both understand the value of the other's specialized survival code. The film's tonal balancing act, juxtaposing Poe's impending spiritual transcendence with the visceral threat of the chameleon, is sustained by the underlying performance of Awkwafina as Jen. Her vocal delivery is characterized by a rapid-fire cadence and a dry, almost exhausted sarcasm that conveys a lifetime spent operating outside systems of established honor. Jen carries a palpable skepticism toward anything that cannot be physically controlled or immediately leveraged. This contrasts poignantly with Poe's deep, almost childlike faith in the unseen forces that guide destiny. When Poe earnestly speaks of the dragon warrior spirit, Jen likely hears only flowery rhetoric masking potential failure. This dynamic forces Poe to articulate his philosophical beliefs not as inherited truths, but as pragmatic strategies. He has to break down the abstract concept of inner peace into something actionable, perhaps explaining that focusing on the moment, an idea central to his training, is simply the most efficient way to avoid getting stabbed in an alleyway. This translation of mysticism into street smarts is where Poe truly begins to earn the Grandmaster title. He demonstrates adaptability in communication, a skill far more crucial than any specific kung fu form when dealing with a fractured world. Furthermore, the chameleon's victory lies in her ability to exploit the very structure of kung fu lineage. Every master in Poe's history achieved greatness through singularity: Tai Lung's unmatched ferocity, Shen's targeted precision, Kai's soul-draining absorption. The chameleon exploits this specialization. By momentarily becoming a composite of these singular forces, she overwhelms the defense because she represents a temporary perfect combination that no single hero could counter. This necessitates a counter-strategy that is inherently not a singular fighting style, but a collaborative, adaptive process, the very process Poe and Jen develop together. Poe's final insight must be that the weakness in the lineage is its very insistence on distinct, perfected forms. The strength of the future lies in the fluid, messy combination of skills exemplified by his pairing with Jen. It is the realization that true mastery means facilitating a spectrum of abilities, not just perfecting one's own. This theme suggests that the next era of guardianship requires synthesis over solo brilliance, moving the franchise beyond the traditional martial arts trope of the singular, infallible hero. The final confrontation, while visually spectacular in its parade of replicated forms, ultimately pivots on the emotional weight of Poe's newfound capacity for forgiveness and trust, a skill far more developed than his physical abilities at this stage. The chameleon, in her arrogance, never bothers to copy the defining trait of the dragon warrior: profound, genuine connection. She can replicate Tai Lung's raw power or Lord Shen's cunning geometry, but she cannot replicate the messy, earned relationship Poe has forged with the cynical Jen. This absence of emotional depth in the villain's arsenal is the crucial, uncopyable element. Poe's trust in Jen, a leap of faith that requires him to suspend his ingrained reverence for established rules and accept a rogue element into the sacred circle of defense, is the tactical move that unlocks the resolution. It is an echo of his own relationship with Shifu, but now Poe is the one extending the unorthodox hand of mentorship. His emotional fluency allows him to read Zhen's genuine intentions beneath her practiced facade of self-interest, recognizing the flicker of true heroism that his own past journey awakened in him. This is the true test of the Grand Master, recognizing latent potential and providing the secure framework for it to manifest, something the chameleon, focused solely on acquisition, is incapable of grasping. Poe's victory here is a victory of character over imitation, confirming that the essence of being the dragon warrior is relational, not merely performative. The concept of the Dragon Scroll's secret, once the ultimate source of Poe's self-doubt and ultimate validation, is elegantly recontextualized in this final chapter. In the first film, the scroll revealed nothing, forcing Poe to realize the power was within him, a powerful yet finite source of personal revelation. Here, however, the narrative suggests the secret evolves with the master. For Poe's predecessors, the secret may have been singular focus or inner tranquility. For Poe, the ultimate nothingness is revealed to be infinite possibility, the capacity to embrace contradiction and paradox. His ability to be both the goofy, loving panda and the formidable warrior, the student and the teacher, is the genuine secret. The chameleon fails because she attempts to steal perfected states, a style, a power, a look, but she cannot steal the capacity for iterative growth. She is trapped in the past she copies, while Poe, having embraced the messy present and an uncertain future with Zhen, operates in a space of continuous becoming. This metaphorical shift in understanding the secret elevates the film beyond simple martial arts spectacle into a commentary on true personal evolution versus superficial mimicry. The resonance of Poe's final, chosen path, retaining the title of Dragon Warrior while preparing to ascend as spiritual leader, speaks volumes about the evolution of heroism within the franchise. It signifies a conscious rejection of the traditional narrative endpoint, where the protagonist must completely abandon their former self to assume a higher office. Unlike many mentor figures who must fully transition into serene detachment, Poe acknowledges the inseparable nature of his identities. His physical prowess, the source of his initial fame and confidence, remains essential, not as a tool for policing the valley, but as a language through which he can still connect with those like Zhen, who might not initially respond to abstract spiritual guidance. This dual role mirrors the complexity of modern leadership, suggesting that authority is most effective when it remains grounded in the practical realities and skills that earned it in the first place. Shifu's gentle approval of this compromise underscores the idea that true wisdom is flexible, allowing for necessary contradictions rather than demanding rigid adherence to preconceived roles. Poe doesn't become a separate, aloof entity. He integrates the new mantle onto his existing, well-worn self, ensuring that the dragon warrior spirit remains vibrant, active, and relatable, rather than becoming a dusty relic preserved in the Jade Palace archives. This decision to retain the active warrior mantle while accepting the philosophical responsibility of the Grand Master speaks to a deeper understanding of legacy management, an area where even seasoned fictional mentors often falter. Shifu himself transitioned from being the immediate hand of action to the guiding voice of counsel, a step Poe now mirrors, yet deliberately modifies. Poe's continued engagement in physical defense prevents his new role from becoming purely hierarchical. He remains accessible, operating on the same plane of risk as those he leads. This accessibility is vital when considering the character of Zhen. For Zhen, witnessing Poe successfully balance the grand strategy of leadership with the tactical necessity of direct physical intervention, even if he delegates the final execution, provides the most potent teaching tool. It shows her that strength isn't binary. One can be both the philosopher and the fighter. This synthesis subtly argues that the highest level of mastery is achieved not by shedding one's defining characteristics, but by recognizing how those characteristics can be repurposed to serve a broader, protective vision. Po is evolving from a student who internalized the lessons of the past masters into a master capable of synthesizing those lessons into entirely new, adaptable forms for the future, ensuring the valley's resilience against threats that, like the chameleon, seek to weaponize nostalgia. The culmination of Po's internal journey is encapsulated in the gentle yet firm way he views the chameleon's collected arsenal of borrowed power. As the villain cycles through the devastating signature moves of past antagonists, a fleeting, spectral echo of Tai Lung's furious momentum, Shen's cold, calculated strikes, or Kai's soul-sapping grip, Po experiences a profound sense of detachment rather than fear. He sees not